Hello, my good friends. How are you today? May God bless you all. I will not introduce anything, you guys. Watch the video and feel it. Then let's evaluate together. The night was a beast, untamed and furious, tearing through Willow Creek, Georgia, with a vengeance. Rain lashed the earth like 1,000 tiny whips, driven sideways by a wind that howled like a wounded animal. The old oak trees lining the town's quiet streets bent and groaned their branches, clawing at the sky as lightning split the darkness. In the heart of this chaos, Jada Williams stood on the sagging roof of her ramshackle house, a silhouette against the storm's wrath. Her heart pounded louder than the thunder, her hands trembling as she wrestled with a tarp, trying to cover a gaping hole where shingles had been ripped away. She was soaked to the bone, her curly hair plastered to her face, her brown skin glistening under the rain's assault. This wasn't how she'd imagined her escape to Willow Creek, a quiet retreat from the glittering cage of Atlanta. But here she was, fighting a losing battle against nature itself. Jada, known to the world as the CEO of Williams Tech, was nobody here. Under the alias Jada Harris, she'd bought this crumbling house to vanish, to find a life where her name didn't come with expectations or dollar signs. But the storm didn't care about her plans. It roared and the roof creaked ominously beneath her. She muttered a prayer. Her grandmother used to sing a gospel tune about weathering trials, and yanked the tarp tighter. Then a crack sharp, bone-rattling split the air. The roof gave way, wood splintering, like brittle bones. Jada's scream was swallowed by the wind as she plummeted, her hands clawing at nothing but rain. Across town, Caleb Monroe gripped the steering wheel of his battered pickup truck wipers, screeching against the deluge. His jaw was tight. His green eyes narrowed as he navigated the flooded roads. He hadn't wanted to take the call. It was past midnight, and his 6-year-old daughter Sophie was asleep at home, tucked under the care of their neighbor, Maitran. But the woman's voice on the phone, shaky, desperate, had clawed at him. "Please," she'd said, "my roof's caving in. I'm alone, and I'm scared." He'd hung up at first, telling himself he couldn't leave Sophie, that it was too dangerous to drive in this mess. But her voice haunted him, fragile, yet fierce, like someone holding back tears while staring down a nightmare. So here he was, cursing under his breath, racing toward an address on the edge of town. He didn't know Jada Harris. Didn't know she was Jada Williams, a name that graced Forbes lists and Atlanta penthouses. To Caleb, she was just a stranger who'd called him because he was the only handyman in Willow Creek who'd picked up a single dad at 36. Caleb lived for Sophie, piecing together a life from plumbing jobs, roof repairs, and whatever else kept the lights on. He hadn't let anyone close since his wife Emily died. Giving birth to Sophie 6 years ago, his world was small, bounded by his daughter's laughter and the ache of a loss he'd never outrun. But tonight something had stirred in him, a pull he couldn't name. The truck skidded onto a gravel driveway, headlights cutting through the rain to reveal a house that looked one storm away from collapse. Its paint was peeling, its porch sagging, but a faint light glowed from an upstairs window. Caleb killed the engine and stepped out the wind, slamming the door shut behind him. He grabbed his flashlight and toolbox, his boots sinking into the mud as he sprinted toward the house. That's when he heard it. A scream, sharp and fleeting, followed by a crash that made his blood run cold. "Jada," he shouted, not knowing if that was her name, only that it was what she'd said on the phone. He rounded the side of the house, his flashlight beam dancing across the chaos. Debris littered the yard, shingles, branches, a shattered flower pot. Then he saw her, a dark figure tumbling through a collapsing section of roof, her hands flailing for purchase. Time slowed. Caleb dropped his toolbox and lunged his boots, slipping on the slick grass. He reached her just as she hit the edge, his arms wrapping around her waist, pulling her back from the void. They crashed into the muddy lawn, rolling once, twice, before coming to a stop. Their breaths ragged. Jada's heart thundered against her ribs, her fingers digging into Caleb's soaked jacket. She was alive, The realization hit her like a second lightning strike, and she clung to him, her face buried in his shoulder. His arms were strong, steady, a lifeline in the storm's fury. Lightning flashed, illuminating his face, rugged with a small scar on his chin. His green eyes wide with something between panic and relief. Rain streamed down his cheeks, his dark hair plastered to his forehead. "You okay?" he rasped, his voice barely audible over the wind. Jada nodded, unable to speak, her throat tight with fear and gratitude. She was shaking, not just from the cold, but from the nearness of death. Caleb helped her to her feet, his hand lingering on her arm as they stumbled toward the house. The front door hung ajar, creaking as they pushed inside. The living room was a mess, puddles on the hardwood floor, a plastic bucket catching drips from the ceiling. The air smelled of damp wood and faint smoke, a reminder of the fireplace Jada had tried to light before climbing onto the roof. Caleb set his flashlight on a rickety table and scanned the room. "You're lucky you didn't break your neck," he said, his tone sharp but laced with worry. "What were you thinking going up there in this?" Jada wiped rain from her eyes, her voice shaky but defiant. "I was thinking I didn't want my bedroom to turn into a swimming pool. I called everyone in town. You were the only one who answered." He snorted, shaking his head. "Yeah, well, I'm starting to regret it." But his eyes softened as he looked at her, taking in her drenched clothes and the way she hugged her arms to her chest. "Come on, let's get you warmed up." He moved to the fireplace, where a few embers still glowed. Jada watched her breath steadying as he crouched and tossed in a log from a pile in the corner. His movements were practiced, efficient, the kind of ease that came from years of fixing things, houses, cars, maybe even hearts, though he didn't seem the type to admit it. The fire caught, casting a warm glow across the room, illuminating the planes of his face and the faint lines of exhaustion around his eyes. Jada sank onto the couch, her wet clothes clinging to her skin. Caleb grabbed a blanket from a nearby chair and handed it to her, his fingers brushing hers. The touch was fleeting, but it sent a jolt through her, unexpected and electric. She looked up, meeting his gaze, and for a moment the storm outside faded. His eyes were a deep green like the forests around Willow Creek, and they held hers with an intensity that made her heart skip. "Thanks," she whispered, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders. "For not letting me fall." Caleb's lips twitched, almost a smile. "Don't make a habit of it." He sat on the arm of the couch, a safe distance away, but close enough that she could smell the rain on him mixed with the faint scent of motor oil and pine. "You're new around here, right? Jada Harris?" She nodded, her stomach twisting. The alias felt flimsy now under his scrutiny. "Yeah, just moved in a couple weeks ago. Wanted a fresh start." He tilted his head, studying her. "Most folks don't pick a falling-apart house in the middle of nowhere for a fresh start. You running from something?" The question was casual, but it hit too close. Jada forced a laugh, hoping it sounded natural. "Just city life. Atlanta's loud, I needed quiet." Caleb didn't press, but his eyes lingered like he could see the cracks in her story. He stood, breaking the moment. "I'll check the roof. See if I can patch it till morning. Stay here, and don't touch anything that might collapse." Jada managed a smile. "No promises. I'm apparently great at breaking things." He chuckled, a low, warm sound that surprised her. "Noted. I'll bill you extra for chaos management." As he headed for the stairs, Jada leaned back, the blanket cocooning her. The fire crackled its warmth, seeping into her bones. But her mind was racing. Caleb was different, gruff but kind, steady in a way she hadn't expected. She'd met men in Atlanta who'd charm you with a smile and a lie, but Caleb's honesty was raw, unpolished. It unnerved her, and she wasn't sure why. She stood to grab a glass of water from the kitchen, her movements sluggish. As she reached for a cup, her phone slipped from her pocket, clattering onto the floor. The screen lit up, a notification flashing. Lauren Brooks. Update on 50 LM deal. Call me. ASAP. Jada's heart stopped. She scrambled to grab the phone, but Caleb's voice came from the doorway. Everything okay? He was back, his jacket dripping a frown, creasing his brow. Jada shoved the phone into her pocket, her face hot. Yeah, just clumsy. It's my sister's old phone. Keeps getting spam. Caleb raised an eyebrow, clearly not buying it, but he didn't push roof's a mess. But I've got the tarp secured for now. I'll come back tomorrow with better tools. He hesitated, then added, You sure you're okay here alone? Storm's not letting up. I'll manage, Jada said, though the thought of the empty house made her chest tighten. You've done enough. Really, he nodded, but his gaze lingered like he was weighing whether to stay. All right. Call if you need me, and I mean. Call, not climb back up there. Jada laughed, the sound easing the tension. Deal. But you're gonna have to trust me not to flood the place. Trust is earned. Harris, he said, a playful edge to his voice. He grabbed his toolbox and headed for the door, pausing to look back. Get some rest. You look like you've been through a war. As the door closed behind him, Jada sank onto the couch, the fire's glow flickering across her face. Her hands were still shaking, not from the cold, but from the weight of what had just happened. She'd nearly died. A stranger had saved her. And that stranger, Caleb Monroe, had looked at her like she was more than a name, more than a problem to fix. But the phone in her pocket burned like a secret, a reminder of the life she was running from. Who was she kidding? Secrets like hers didn't stay buried in a town like Willow Creek. Outside, Caleb climbed into his truck, the rain still hammering the windshield. He glanced at the house, its lone light, a beacon in the storm. Jada Harris was trouble. He could feel it, not the kind that started fights, but the kind that slipped into your life and turned it upside down. He'd sworn to keep his world simple for Sophie's sake, but as he drove back to Mize to pick up his daughter, he couldn't shake the image of Jada's eyes, fierce and vulnerable, or the way her hand had felt in his trouble or not. Something told him he'd be back. Did Jada and Caleb's brush with danger spark something in you? That moment by the fireplace, did it make your heart race? Drop a comment with your favorite part, and hit that subscribe button for soulful stories to follow their journey. Who is Jada really, and will Caleb let her in? Don't miss what's coming next. The morning after the storm dawned soft and golden, as if the sky was apologizing for its tantrum. Willow Creek glistened under a fresh coat of dew, the air thick with the scent of wet earth and blooming magnolias. Jada Williams stood on her sagging porch, a mug of coffee warming her hands, her eyes tracing the damage left by the night before. The roof was a patchwork of tarp and hope shingles scattered across the yard like fallen leaves. Her house looked like it had lost a fight, but she was still standing, and that felt like a victory. Inside the living room was a battlefield of buckets and damp towels, but the fireplace still held a faint glow, a reminder of Caleb Monroe's hands coaxing it to life. Jada's fingers tightened around her mug as she thought of him, those green eyes steady and searching, the way he'd pulled her from the brink of disaster. She shook her head, pushing the memory away. She hadn't come to Willow Creek for complications, especially not the kind that came with a rugged, single dad who saw too much. But she needed her roof fixed, and Caleb was the only one who'd shown up. So she'd called him that morning, her voice steadier than she felt asking him to come back. Now, as the sun climbed higher, a familiar pickup truck rumbled into her driveway. Caleb stepped out, toolbox in hand, but he wasn't alone. A small figure bounced out of the passenger seat, her braids swinging her pink sneakers, splashing through a puddle. Sophie Monroe, 6 years old and all sunshine, waved at Jada like they were old friends. "Hi, Miss Jada." Sophie called, her voice bright as the morning. "Daddy said your house got beat up by the storm. Did it really fall on you?" Jada laughed, stepping off the porch to meet them. "Almost. But your dad saved the day." You must be Sophie. Yup, Sophie grinned, showing a gap where a front tooth used to be. I'm 6.5. Daddy says I'm his best helper, but I'm not allowed to climb roofs yet. Caleb ruffled Sophie's hair, his expression softening. And you're not gonna start today, kiddo. Stay on the ground, okay? He glanced at Jada, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Morning. You look less like a drowned cat today. Jada raised an eyebrow, her lips twitching. Gee, thanks. You're looking less like a grumpy bear yourself, Sophie giggled, tugging at Caleb's sleeve. Daddy's not grumpy. He just forgets to smile sometimes, outed by my own kid, Caleb muttered. But his eyes were warm as he looked at Sophie. He turned to Jada. I'll check the roof, see what we're dealing with. Might take a couple days to get it solid. You good with Sophie hanging out? More than good, Jada said, crouching to Sophie's level. Want to help me clean up inside? I bet you're great at organizing buckets. Sophie nodded enthusiastically, her braids bouncing. I'm the best at buckets. As Caleb headed for the ladder, Jada led Sophie into the house, the girls' chatter filling the quiet. The living room smelled of damp wood and coffee, sunlight streaming through the cracked windows to dance across the hardwood floor. Jada handed Sophie a towel, and they set to work mopping up puddles. Sophie narrating an elaborate story about a dragon who lived in her backyard. Jada listened, charmed by the girl's imagination, but her mind kept drifting to Caleb, his quiet strength, the way he'd looked at her last night, like she was a puzzle he wanted to solve. They were halfway through the buckets when Sophie spotted the old upright piano in the corner, its keys yellowed but intact. Whoa, she gasped, dropping her towel. You have a piano? Do you play? Jada hesitated, her fingers brushing the blanket still draped over the couch. The piano had been her grandmother's, one of the few things she'd brought from Atlanta. It was a piece of her past of late nights singing gospel tunes with Gran, their voices weaving through the humid Georgia air. She hadn't played since moving here, afraid it would stir too much. But Sophie's wide eyes were impossible to resist. Yeah, I play a little, Jada said, sliding onto the bench. Want to hear something? Sophie nodded, climbing onto the bench beside her. Jada's fingers hovered over the keys, then settled into the opening chords of Amazing Grace, a song Gran had sung through every storm, literal and otherwise. The notes were tentative at first, but as Jada's voice joined in low and soulful, the music filled the room, rich and resonant. Sophie swayed, her eyes shining, and for a moment Jada was back in her grandmother's kitchen, safe and whole. Caleb paused on the roof hammer in hand when the sound drifted up through the open window. Jada's voice was like honey, warm and deep, carrying a weight he hadn't expected. He leaned against the chimney, listening, his chest tight. Sophie had always loved music. Emily used to sing to her lullabies that still echoed in Caleb's dreams. But Sophie hadn't opened up to anyone new. Not like this. He glanced down, catching a glimpse of them through the window. Sophie leaning against Jada. Jada's fingers dancing across the keys, her face alight with something he couldn't name. It stirred something in him, something he'd buried long ago. The song ended, and Sophie clapped, her grin infectious. You're like a fairy godmother. Miss Jada, a music fairy. Jada laughed, her heart lighter than it had been in weeks. A music fairy. Huh, I'll take it. What's your favorite song? Sophie thought for a moment, then sang a few wobbly notes of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Jada joined in, their voices blending, and soon they were giggling, making up silly lyrics about stars and dragons. The sound carried outside where Caleb was climbing down the ladder, his boots heavy with mud. He paused at the door, listening, a rare smile breaking across his face. For the first time in years, his house felt too quiet, too empty. This Jada's laugh, Sophie's joy, was something he hadn't realized he missed. The moment was interrupted by a knock at the door. Jada looked up surprised as Mitron stepped inside, balancing a tray of cornbread muffins and a thermos of sweet tea. My 50 and radiant, was Willow Creek's unofficial matriarch, her tiambang a hub of gossip and comfort. Her dark hair was streaked with gray, pulled into a neat bun, and her smile was as warm as the muffins she carried. Morning Jada Mai called her slight Vietnamese accent, softening the words. I heard you had a rough night. Thought you could use some breakfast. Jada stood brushing flour from her hands. She'd been showing Sophie how to help with imaginary baking. Mai, you're a lifesaver. Come in, please. Mai set the tray on the table, her eyes twinkling as she spotted Sophie. And who's this? My favorite dragon-slaying princess. Sophie giggled, hugging Mai's legs. Hi, Miss Mai. Miss Jada's a music fairy, is she? Now. Mai shot Jada a knowing look. Well, she's fitting right in. Willow Creek could use a little magic. Caleb stepped inside, wiping his hands on a rag. Smells like you're trying to bribe us. Mai swatted his arm playfully. Hush, Caleb. You're too skinny. Eat a muffin before you fall through that roof. Jada laughed, the sound easing the tension she hadn't realized she was carrying. She poured sweet tea for everyone, the clink of glasses mingling with Sophie's chatter. As they sat around the table, the room felt alive, filled with the warmth of cornbread, the tang of tea, and the easy rhythm of small-town life. Jada watched Caleb, noticing the way he listened to Sophie, his eyes softening with every word. He was a good father, the kind she'd never had. Her own father had been a shadow, a man who measured love in contracts and legacies. Not moments like this. The peace was broken when Jada's phone buzzed on the counter. She froze, her hand hovering over a muffin. Caleb glanced at her, his brow furrowing. Your sister again, he asked, his tone light but curious. Jada forced a smile, grabbing the phone and silencing it. Yeah, probably. She's, persistent. But her heart raced. It was Lauren Brooks, her assistant, likely calling about the deal she'd left hanging in Atlanta. She couldn't risk Caleb seeing another notification, not after last night's close call. Mai, sensing the shift, stood and clapped her hands. All right, Sophie, want to help me make a bonbao? Delivery later, I need a taste tester. Sophie's eyes lit up. Yes, can I, Daddy? Caleb nodded, his gaze still on Jada. Sure, kiddo. Just don't eat Mai out of business. As Mai and Sophie headed outside, chattering about steamed buns, Jada busied herself with the dishes, avoiding Caleb's eyes. He stood leaning against the counter, his voice low. You sure you're okay? You've been jumpy since that phone went utilities. The late afternoon sun hung low over Willow Creek, painting the town in hues of amber and gold. The air was thick with the scent of pine and freshly cut grass, a stark contrast to the storm that had ravaged the place just days ago. Jada Williams stood in her cluttered kitchen, the window open to let in the breeze, her hands busy scrubbing a pan crusted with cornbread batter. The house was quieter now, the buckets gone, but the memory of Sophie's laughter and Caleb's steady presence lingered like a song she couldn't shake. She'd invited Caleb back to fix a leaky pipe under the sink, a job he'd insisted on doing himself, after noticing a drip during their impromptu breakfast with Mai and Sophie. Jada hadn't argued. Truth was, she wanted him here, even if she wasn't ready to admit why. Outside, Caleb's pickup truck was parked crookedly in the driveway, its bed piled with tools and lumber for the roof he was still patching. He was under the kitchen sink now, his boots sticking out a wrench, clanking against metal. Jada glanced at him, her lips twitching at the sight. He was all focus, his brow furrowed, his flannel shirt rolled up to reveal forearms tanned from years of outdoor work. She caught herself staring and turned back to the pan, scrubbing harder than necessary. You're gonna wear a hole through that thing, Caleb said, his voice muffled from under the sink. Ease up, Harris. The cornbread's already dead. Jada laughed, the sound slipping out before she could stop it. Says the guy wrestling a pipe like it's an alligator. You sure you're winning down there? A grunt, then a chuckle. Pipe's putting up a fight, but I've got it cornered. Give me 5 minutes. Jada shook her head, a smile lingering. She liked this, his dry humor, the way he filled the space without trying. It felt easy, natural, like the Sunday suppers she used to have with her grandmother, filled with laughter and gospel tunes. But the ease made her uneasy too. Caleb was getting close, asking questions she wasn't ready to answer. Like yesterday when he'd noticed her flinch at another call from Lauren Brooks, her assistant in Atlanta. She'd brushed it off, but his eyes had lingered sharp and curious. Jada Williams, CEO of Williams Tech, was a secret she'd buried under the alias Jada Harris Willow Creek was her sanctuary. But secrets had a way of clawing their way out. She was rinsing the pan when Caleb slid out from under the sink, wiping his hands on a rag. "Leaks fixed," he said, standing and stretching his shirt, pulling tight across his shoulders. "But you've got bigger problems. This place is one bad day from falling apart. You sure you're set on staying?" Jada dried her hands, meeting his gaze. "I'm not going anywhere. This house is mine. Cracks and all, kinda like me." Caleb's lips twitched, almost a smile. "Fair enough. Just don't blame me when the next storm turns it into a pile of kindling." Before Jada could reply, a rustling sound came from the counter. Caleb had bumped a stack of papers while reaching for his wrench, and a folder slid to the floor, spilling its contents. Jada's heart stopped as she recognized it, a packet of documents she'd meant to hide, left out after a late-night call with Lauren. Caleb bent to pick them up, his brow furrowing as he scanned a page. His hand froze, his eyes narrowing. "Jada Williams, CEO, Williams Tech." He read aloud, his voice low, like he was testing the words. He looked up the paper dangling from his fingers. "This you?" Jada's mouth went dry. She lunged for the folder, snatching it from his hand, but the damage was done. Her hands trembled as she stuffed the papers back inside her mind, racing for an excuse. "It's not what you think," she stammered. "Just some old stuff from a job I used to have." Caleb crossed his arms, his expression hardening. "A job? Jada, this says you run a company worth millions. That's not a job. That's a whole other life. Who are you, really?" The air in the kitchen turned heavy, the hum of cicadas outside the only sound. Jada's pulse pounded in her ears. She'd known this moment would come, but not like this. Not with Caleb staring at her like she'd betrayed him. "I'm Jada Harris," she said, her voice firmer than she felt. "That's who I am here. The rest, it's complicated." "Complicated?" Caleb's laugh was sharp, humorless. "You let me and Sophie into your house, let her call you a fairy godmother, and you're hiding this. Were you just playing house, seeing how the small-town folks live?" Jada flinched, his words cutting deeper than she expected. "That's not fair, Caleb. I came here to get away from that life. The money, the pressure, the people who only cared about my name. I didn't lie to you. You didn't tell the truth either." He shot back. He ran a hand through his hair, his jaw tight. "I've got a kid. Jada, I don't let just anyone near her. I thought you were—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "Forget it." He grabbed his toolbox, his movements jerky, and headed for the door. Jada's chest ached, her voice breaking as she called after him. "Caleb. Wait, please." He paused, his hand on the doorknob, but didn't turn around. "I'll finish the roof tomorrow. That's what you paid me for." The door slammed behind him, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Jada sank onto a chair, the folder clutched to her chest. The kitchen smelled of cornbread and pipe grease, but it felt colder now, emptier. She'd wanted to tell him to explain why she'd run from Atlanta, from the boardrooms and the spotlight. But how could she, when every word felt like a risk? Caleb wasn't just a handyman. He was a father, a man who'd built a life for his daughter out of grief and grit, and she'd let him think she was someone she wasn't. The rumble of Caleb's truck faded, leaving Jada alone with her thoughts. She opened the folder, staring at the letterhead with her real name. Jada Williams. It felt like a stranger's life now, one she'd left behind. But Willow Creek wasn't letting her escape so easily. She needed to fix this, not just with Caleb, but with herself. Across town, the community center buzzed with chatter, the air thick with the scent of fried chicken and sweet tea. It was the weekly potluck, a Willow Creek tradition where folks gathered to share food and gossip. Tonight, though, the mood was tense. Jada arrived late, her hair pulled into a messy bun, her eyes shadowed from a sleepless night. She'd come to clear her head, hoping the warmth of the town would ease the sting of Caleb's words. But as she stepped inside, she caught snippets of conversation that made her stomach twist. "They're saying some big company's eyeing the community land," a woman whispered, slicing a peach cobbler. "Wanna turn our playground and church into a strip mall." Jada froze her hand, hovering over a plate of collard greens. The community land was the heart of Willow Creek. The playground where Sophie chased fireflies, the church where gospel choirs sang on Sundays. She edged closer, listening as Maitron, her neighbor, and the town's unofficial matriarch spoke up. "I heard it's a done deal." Mai said, her voice low as she arranged a tray of banbao. "They're meeting with the county next week. We need to fight this. But how? We're just a small town." Jada's mind raced. She knew how companies like that worked. Williams Tech had fought similar battles, buying up land for data centers or office parks. She could help quietly using her contacts to stall the deal, but it would mean risking her cover, reaching out to Lauren or her lawyers in Atlanta. She glanced across the room where Caleb stood with Sophie, his arm around her shoulders. He hadn't looked at her since she walked in his face, a mask of indifference. The sight hurt more than she expected. Before she could decide, Darius Reed, Caleb's best friend and the town's resident jokester, sidled up a plate piled high with fried chicken. "Well, well, Miss Jada," he said, grinning. "You look like you just lost a fight with a biscuit. What's got you so gloomy?" Jada forced a smile, grateful for the distraction. "Just tired, Darius, long week." "Uh-huh," he said, eyeing her skeptically. "You and Caleb got some kind of storm brewing. He's been grumpier than a cat in a bathtub all day." Jada's smile faltered. "We had a misunderstanding." "It's fine," Darius laughed, shaking his head. "Misunderstanding my foot. Look, I've known Caleb since we were kids. He's stubborn, but he's soft where it counts. Give him time. And maybe stop dropping papers with your secret identity on him." Jada's eyes widened. "He told you." "Nah, but I saw his face when he left your place. Looked like he found out. Santa ain't real." Darius leaned closer, his voice dropping. "Whatever you're hiding, Jada, just be straight with him. He's been through too much to play games." She nodded, her throat tight. "I know I'm trying." The conversation was cut short by a commotion at the door. A man in a suit out of place among the jeans and flannels stepped inside holding a clipboard. Whispers rippled through the crowd as he introduced himself as a representative from Pinnacle Development, the company eyeing the community land. "We're here to discuss opportunities," he said, his smile too polished. "This project could bring jobs growth." "Growth?" Mai interrupted, her hands on her hips. "You mean tearing down our church for a parking lot?" "No, thank you." The room erupted in agreement, voices overlapping. Jada watched her heart sinking. This was bigger than her fight with Caleb Willow. Creek was her home now, whether she deserved it or not. She slipped out the back, her phone heavy in her pocket. She needed to call Lauren to see what she could do, but as she stepped into the cool night air, she heard footsteps behind her. "Jada." Caleb's voice was low-guarded. He stood a few feet away, Sophie at his side, clutching a plate of cookies. "You leaving already?" She turned her chest tight. "Just needed some air." "It's a lot in there." He nodded, his eyes searching hers. "Yeah, this town's worth fighting for. You sticking around for that?" The question hung between them, heavy with meaning. Jada met his gaze, her voice steady. I'm not going anywhere, Caleb. Not yet. He didn't reply, but something flickered in his eyes. Hope, maybe, or doubt. Sophie tugged at his hand, oblivious to the tension. Miss Jada. You want a cookie? I help Miss Mai make 'em. Jada smiled, crouching to take one. You're a baking star. Sophie. Save me another. Okay. As Sophie beamed, Caleb's expression softened, but he didn't speak. He led Sophie back inside, leaving Jada alone under the stars. She pulled out her phone, her fingers hovering over Lauren's number. She was done hiding. Willow Creek needed her, and maybe, just maybe, Caleb did too. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting Willow Creek in a soft lavender glow. The town was alive with the hum of crickets and the faint strains of a gospel hymn drifting from the community church. Inside Mai Tran's Tiamban, the air was thick with the scent of warm cornbread, banbao, and brewing coffee, the kind of comfort that wrapped around you like a quilt. Jada Williams stood behind the counter, her hands dusted with flour, her curly hair tied back with a scarf. She was helping Mai prep for a surprise gathering, one that Sophie Monroe had insisted on calling the peace party. The 6-year-old had overheard enough of Jada and Caleb's tension to decide they needed fixing, and with Mai and Darius Reed's help, she'd turned Mai's bakery into a makeshift reconciliation zone. Jada's heart. 6-year-old Sophie, with her gap-toothed grin and boundless energy, had spent the afternoon decorating stringing paper hearts across the windows and scribbling a sign that read, Happy Friends in bright pink crayon. Jada couldn't say no to those sparkling eyes, even if the thought of facing Caleb made her stomach twist. Their fight 2 days ago, when he'd found the documents revealing her identity as Jada Williams, CEO of Williams Tech, had left a raw ache in her chest. He'd looked at her like she'd shattered something fragile, and she hadn't known how to fix it, but Sophie's determination, backed by Mai's gentle nudging and Darius's relentless teasing, had pulled Jada here tonight. She wasn't sure if Caleb would even show, but she owed it to Sophie, and maybe to herself, to try. The bakery buzzed with familiar faces. Mai flitted between tables, refilling sweet tea and passing out plates of fried chicken and collard greens. Darius, lounging in a corner with a drumstick, was regaling a group with a story about the time he accidentally locked himself in his own garage, his booming laugh cutting through the chatter. The community was still reeling from the threat to their land, the playground, church, and ball field targeted by Pinnacle Development for a strip mall. But tonight, they were holding on to hope, stitching their worries into laughter and shared plates. Jada was arranging a tray of peach cobbler when Sophie burst through the door, dragging Caleb behind her. He looked wary, his green eyes scanning the room before landing on Jada. Her breath caught. He was in a clean flannel shirt, his dark hair still damp from a shower, a faint stubble shadowing his jaw. Sophie tugged him forward, her braids bouncing. Miss Jada. Sophie squealed, throwing her arms around Jada's waist. You came. I told Daddy we had to make you friends again. Jada crouched, hugging her back, her eyes flicking to Caleb. You did good, kiddo. This place looks like a fairy tale. Caleb cleared his throat, shoving his hands in his pockets. She's been planning this all week. Didn't give me much choice. Jada stood, managing a small smile. Sounds like Sophie. She's got a knack for getting her way. Sophie beamed, oblivious to the tension, and ran off to show Mai her crayon masterpiece. Jada and Caleb stood in awkward silence, the hum of the bakery fading around them. Jada's fingers twisted the hem of her apron, her heart pounding. She'd rehearsed what to say, a dozen versions of an apology and explanation, but none felt right. Caleb. She started, her voice low. I'm sorry. I should have told you who I was. I wasn't trying to play you. I needed to be Jada Harris here. Someone real. His jaw tightened, but his eyes softened just a fraction. I get wanting a fresh start, but you let me and Sophie in. Jada, that's not nothing. I needed to know who I was letting near my kid. I know, she said, her throat tight. I've been running from that life board rooms. Headlines, people who only saw my bank account Willow Creek, was supposed to be different. Then I met you and Sophie, and it was. I didn't want to lose that. Caleb studied her, his expression unreadable. Before he could respond, Darius sauntered over, a mischievous grin on his face. You all look like you're planning a funeral. This is a party, not a courtroom. Lighten up, or I'm eating all the cobbler. Jada laughed despite herself, and Caleb rolled his eyes. You're a menace. Darius? Proud of it, Darius said, winking at Jada. Now somebody dance or something. Sophie's orders. As if on cue, Sophie dragged a portable speaker to the center of the room, blasting a lively gospel tune that had Mai clapping along. The crowd cheered, and soon kids were twirling, adults swaying the bakery alive with rhythm. Jada watched, her heart lifting, but her eyes kept finding Caleb. He was watching her too, his gaze steady like he was seeing her for the first time. The night wore on, plates, emptying, laughter, echoing. Jada and Caleb found themselves cleaning up after most folks had left Sophie dozing on a bench with a half-eaten cookie Mai, and Darius were in the kitchen bickering over who'd burned the last batch of cornbread, their voices a comforting hum. Jada stacked plates, Caleb wiping down tables, the silence between them softer now, less jagged. You're good with her, Caleb said suddenly, nodding towards Sophie. Sophie? I mean, she doesn't open up like that. Not since her mom. Jada paused, her hands stilling. She's special, Caleb. Reminds me of me at that age, always dreaming. I'm glad she trusts me, she does. He said, his voice rough, and I'm trying to. It's just hard. After Emily, Sophie's mom, I built walls for her sake. But you're making it real tough to keep 'em up. Jada's breath hitched. She stepped closer, the counter between them, feeling like a canyon. I don't want to tear anything down. Caleb, I just want to be here, with you, with Sophie, if you'll let me. He looked at her, his eyes dark with something raw, hope, fear, maybe both. Then, without a word, he closed the distance, his hand cupping her cheek. Jada froze, her pulse racing as his thumb brushed her skin, warm and calloused. The world shrank to the space between them, the bakery's glow fading, the gospel music, a distant pulse. Caleb, she whispered, but the word was swallowed as he kissed her fierce and unyielding. It wasn't gentle, it was a storm, all the pent-up words and hurts pouring out. Jada's hands found his chest, gripping his shirt, pulling him closer. They stumbled against an old armchair in the corner, the wood creaking as they sank into it, his lips never leaving hers. Her fingers grazed the bare skin where his shirt had hitched up his warmth, grounding her, igniting her. The kiss slowed their breaths, mingling, and they pulled back, foreheads touching eyes locked in the dim light. Damn, Caleb murmured, a shaky laugh escaping. Didn't plan that. Jada smiled, her heart pounding. Good thing I'm okay with surprises. They sat there tangled in the chair, the bakery quiet, except for Sophie's soft snores and Mai's muffled laughter from the kitchen. Jada wanted to stay in this moment, but reality crept in, a buzzing from her phone on the counter. She tensed, pulling away to check it. A text from Lauren Brooks. I'm in Willow Creek. We need to talk. Now, Jada's stomach dropped. Lauren. Her assistant was here in her sanctuary, ready to drag her back to Atlanta. She glanced at Caleb, who was watching her, his expression wary, but not cold. Everything okay? He asked, his voice steady. She hesitated, then nodded, slipping the phone into her pocket. Just a friend, I'll handle it. But as she helped Caleb carry Sophie to his truck, the weight of Lauren's message settled like a stone. Lauren wasn't just a friend. She was a reminder of the life Jada had left, the the one threatening to pull her away from Willow Creek, from Caleb, from Sophie. And then there was the community land, still at risk from Pinnacle development. Jada had already contacted a lawyer friend in Atlanta to dig into the deal, but it would take time Willow Creek might not have. As Caleb drove off, Sophie waving sleepily from the window, Jada stood in the bakery's doorway, hair cool against her skin. The taste of Caleb's kiss lingered, a promise, and a risk. Lauren's arrival was a storm on the horizon, one Jada couldn't outrun. But tonight she'd felt something real, a spark, a purpose. She wasn't just Jada Williams or Jada Harris. She was both. And she'd fight for this town, for this family, for herself. The air in Willow Creek was heavy, charged with the threat of another storm. Dark clouds rolled in from the west, their edges jagged like torn cotton, casting the town in a restless twilight. Jada Williams stood outside the community center, her arms crossed, her curly hair whipping in the rising wind. The old brick building hummed with voices. A tense gathering of townsfolk called to discuss the looming threat from Pinnacle development. The company's plan to buy the community land home to the playground, church, and ball field had sparked outrage, and tonight's meeting was a last-ditch effort to fight back. Jada's heart pounded not just for the town, but for what she feared was coming. Lauren Brooks, her assistant from Atlanta, was in Willow Creek, and Jada knew she wasn't here for a friendly visit. Inside the center smelled of polished wood and brewed coffee, the kind served in styrofoam cups at every southern town meeting. Folding chairs were packed with familiar faces. Maitran, her hands clasped tightly. Darius Reed leaning back with a scowl. And Caleb Monroe standing near the back with Sophie, his arm around her shoulders. Jada avoided his gaze, her stomach twisting. Their kiss 2 nights ago at Mai's bakery had been a wildfire burning through her defenses, but Lauren's arrival had doused it with cold reality. Jada had spent the day dodging Lauren's calls, hoping to keep her 2 worlds, Willow Creek and Atlanta, apart. But as she slipped into a seat near Mai, she felt the weight of her secret pressing down. The meeting began with a prayer led by the church pastor, whose voice carried the steady cadence of gospel sermons. Then a county official took the podium explaining Pinnacle's offer. Jobs, revenue progress. The crowd murmured, unconvinced. Mai stood, her voice sharp. Progress? You mean bulldozing our kids' playground for a parking lot? We're not selling our home. Cheers erupted, but the official's smile was thin. The county's considering all options. Pinnacle's offer is substantial. You have until next week to propose an alternative. Jada's mind raced. She'd already contacted a lawyer friend in Atlanta to dig into Pinnacle's deal, but the clock was ticking. She could use her influence as Jada Williams, CEO of Williams Tech, to counter the offer, buy the land, herself maybe, or fund a legal fight. But that would mean exposing her identity, risking everything she'd built here. She glanced at Caleb, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the podium. He hadn't spoken to her since the bakery, but his presence grounded her even now. As the meeting dragged on, the door swung open, and Jada's heart stopped. Lauren Brooks stepped inside, her sleek blazer and heels jarring against the room's denim and flannel. Her blonde hair was pulled into a tight bun, her eyes scanning the crowd until they locked on Jada. The room quieted, sensing the shift. Lauren strode to the front, ignoring the puzzled looks, and addressed the crowd like she owned it. "Good evening," she said, her voice crisp. "I'm Lauren Brooks, representing Williams Tech. I'm here to discuss an alternative to Pinnacle's proposal, one that preserves your land and invests in your community." Jada's blood ran cold. She gripped the edge of her chair, her nails digging into the wood. Lauren was blowing her cover right here in front of everyone. Caleb's head snapped toward Jada, his eyes narrowing. Sophie, sensing the tension, clutched his hand. Lauren continued, her smile calculated. "Williams Tech is prepared to fund a community trust, ensuring the land remains yours. But I need to be clear. This offer comes from our CEO, Jada Williams. She paused, turning to Jada. Isn't that right, Jada? The room erupted in whispers, heads turning. Jada stood her legs unsteady, her voice barely above a whisper. Lauren, stop! But Lauren didn't. Jada Williams has been living among you, as Jada Harris, but she's here to help. She's been working behind the scenes to save your land. You deserve to know the truth. The air was sucked out of the room. Mai's eyes widened. Darius let out a low whistle and Caleb's face hardened his gaze, boring into Jada. Sophie looked confused, her small voice piping up. Miss Jada, are you a secret superhero? The question broke Jada's heart, but before she could answer, Caleb stepped forward, his voice low and cold. A superhero, or someone playing games with us. You let me and Sophie trust you, Jada. Was this all a stunt? Come to the small town, play the hero, then run back to your penthouse? Jada's eyes stung her voice, breaking. No, Caleb. This wasn't a game. I came here to escape that life. You and Sophie, you're the realest thing I've ever had. Then why lie? He snapped, his hands clenched. You could have told me. Told us. The crowd watched, silent, the tension thick enough to choke on Lauren. Sensing she'd overstepped, faltered, Jada. I thought. You thought wrong. Jada cut her off. Her voice sharp. She turned to the crowd, her hands trembling. I'm sorry I didn't tell you who I was. I came to Willow Creek to find myself, not to hide. I've been working to stop Pinnacle, not because I'm some CEO, but because this town is my home now. Believe me or not, that's the truth. Some nodded, others whispered, but Caleb's silence was deafening. He took Sophie's hand and walked out the door, slamming behind him. Jada's knees buckled and she sank into her chair, Mai's hand squeezing her shoulder. The meeting dissolved into chaos, arguments flaring, but Jada barely heard it. All she could see was Caleb's back, disappearing into the night. Hours later, the storm broke, rain hammering Willow Creek like a judgment. Jada sat in her living room, the house creaking around her, her phone dark. She'd ignored Lauren's texts, her mind replaying Caleb's words. She'd lost him. Maybe Sophie too, but worse. She'd shaken the town's trust, the one thing she'd come here to find. She was about to pour herself a glass of sweet tea when a frantic knock rattled the door. It was Darius, soaked to the bone, his usual grin gone. Jada, it's Sophie. She's missing. Jada's heart stopped. What? How she was at the playground with Caleb after the meeting. He turned his back for a second and she was gone. We're searching, but the storm's bad and the creek's rising. Caleb's losing it. Jada didn't think. She grabbed her raincoat and boots, following Darius into the deluge. The town was a blur of flashlights and shouting voices, neighbors scouring the streets, the woods, the church. Jada's boots sank into the mud as she ran toward the playground, the wind tearing at her. The creek nearby roared, swollen from the rain, its banks slick and treacherous. She pictured Sophie's small frame, her pink sneakers, her braids alone, scared, maybe hurt. The thought was unbearable. Caleb Jada called, spotting him near the creek, his flashlight sweeping the water. His face was pale, his eyes wild with panic. She was right here, he said, his voice breaking. I told her to stay close. I turned away for 1 second. We'll find her, Jada said, gripping his arm. I promise. He pulled away, his eyes flashing. Don't make promises you can't keep. Jada swallowed the hurt and kept searching her flashlight, cutting through the rain. She moved along the creek, calling Sophie's name, her voice hoarse. Then a faint sound, a sob barely audible over the storm. Jada froze her beam, landing on a small figure huddled under a willow tree, its roots curling into the creek's edge. Sophie soaked and shivering, her face streaked with mud. Jada sprinted, sliding to her knees beside the girl. Sophie's ankle was twisted, her eyes wide with fear. "It's okay, sweetheart. I've got you, Miss Jada," Sophie whimpered, clinging to her. "I wanted to find you. I didn't mean to get lost." Jada's heart shattered. She wrapped her raincoat around Sophie, shielding her from the rain, and sang a gospel tune her grandmother used to hum, "His eye is on the sparrow," to keep her calm. The creek roared inches away, but Jada held tight, her voice steady despite the cold seeping into her bones. Minutes later, Caleb's voice cut through the storm. "Sophie," he crashed through the underbrush, dropping to his knees beside them. He pulled Sophie into his arms, kissing her hair, his shoulders shaking. "I've got you, baby. You're okay." Jada stood trembling, her raincoat dripping. Caleb looked up, his eyes raw with gratitude and something deeper. "You found her," he said, his voice thick. "You saved her." Jada nodded, tears mixing with the rain. "She's family. Caleb, I'd do anything for her." He stared at her, the storm raging around them, and for a moment the world was just the three of them. Jada, Caleb, Sophie, Darius, and Mai arrived, shouting for help, and soon the town rallied, wrapping Sophie in blankets, guiding them to shelter. But as Jada watched Caleb carry Sophie away, she knew the fight wasn't over. Lauren was still here, the land was still at risk, and Caleb's trust was still broken. But tonight, she'd proven something to him, to herself. She wasn't running anymore. The spring morning in Willow Creek, Georgia, was a hymn of renewal. The sky stretched wide and blue, dotted with cotton puff clouds, while the air carried the sweet scent of blooming magnolias and freshly mowed grass. The community land, once threatened by pinnacle development, was now a vibrant testament to resilience. Rows of new homes stood proud, their white trim, gleaming porches adorned with flower boxes. Children laughed as they ran across the rebuilt playground, and a gospel choir from the church rehearsed under a white canopy, their voices soaring with "Oh, Happy Day." Today was the grand opening of the Willow Creek Home of Hearts project, a housing initiative for families in need funded by Jada Williams and led by Caleb Monroe. The town buzzed with pride, but beneath the celebration, Jada felt a quiet tremor of anticipation. She stood near the media tent, her navy maxi dress hugging her curves, her curly hair cascading over her shoulders, catching the sunlight. A year ago, she'd arrived in Willow Creek as Jada Harris, a stranger hiding from her life as a tech CEO. Now she was home, her heart tethered to this town, to Caleb, to Sophie. The project had been her redemption, a way to prove she belonged not as a billionaire, but as one of them. She scanned the crowd, her eyes finding Caleb adjusting a microphone at the podium. He was in a crisp button-down, his dark hair neatly combed, a nervous energy in his movements. Sophie, radiant, in a pale yellow dress, with ribbons in her braids, bounced beside him, waving a handmade sign that read, "Home, Sweet Home." Jada's heart swelled, but a shadow lingered. She'd made peace with Caleb after Sophie's rescue in the storm, when she'd proven her love by saving his daughter. They'd worked side by side on the housing project, rebuilding trust as they built homes. But her past, the life she'd left in Atlanta, still felt like a ghost ready to haunt her. She pushed the thought away as Maitron approached, balancing a tray of cornbread muffins, and Banbao, her smile as warm as the sun. "You did this," Jada Mai said, nudging her. "These homes, this joy, it's because of you." Jada shook her head, her voice soft. "Not just me, Caleb. You, Darius. The whole town. We did it together." Mai's eyes twinkled. "Maybe. But you're the one who got Caleb smiling again. That's a miracle all its own." Jada laughed, but her cheeks warmed. She glanced at Caleb, catching his eye. He gave her a small nod, his lips curving in a way that made her pulse quicken. Before she could respond, Darius Reed swaggered over his tie, slightly askew, a plate of fried chicken in hand. "All right, Miss CEO," he teased, winking. "You ready to cut that ribbon, or you too busy making googly eyes at my boy?" "Caleb." Jada swatted his arm, grinning. "Keep it up, Darius, and I'll make you eat all of Mai's burnt cornbread," Mai gasped, mock offended. "Burnt. I'll have you know, my cornbread is legendary." The banter eased Jada's nerves, but as the ceremony began, a ripple of unease returned. The mayor spoke first, thanking donors and volunteers, then introduced Jada. She stepped to the podium, her hands steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. The crowd quieted their faces, a mosaic of trust and pride. "I came to Willow Creek, a stranger." Jada began, her voice clear. "I was lost, running from a life that felt like a cage, but you welcomed me, not because of my name or my money, but because that's who you are. A year ago, a storm brought me to Caleb Monroe's doorstep, and he didn't just fix my roof. He and Sophie helped rebuild me. This project," she gestured to the homes, "is what home really means. Not walls, but love. Not wealth, but purpose." The crowd erupted in applause, and Jada's eyes found Caleb's. He was smiling, a real smile, the kind that reached his green eyes. Sophie clapped wildly, her sign wobbling. Jada stepped down, her heart full. But the moment was shattered by a voice from the crowd, deep, commanding, and chillingly familiar. "Jada Williams," the man said, stepping forward. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a gray suit, his salt and pepper hair framing a face Jada hadn't seen in years. Her father, Roland Williams, stood before her, his presence a thunderclap in the festive air. The crowd hushed, sensing the shift. Caleb's smile vanished, his hand tightening on Sophie's shoulder. Jada's breath caught her body, frozen. Roland's eyes, cold and calculating, locked onto hers. "You think you can erase your past by playing savior in this backwater town?" he said, his voice carrying. "You owe your family, Jada. You walked away from a marriage that would have secured our legacy, left us to clean up your mess, and now you're throwing money at these people to buy their forgiveness." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Jada's hands trembled, her mind reeling. She'd cut ties with her father a decade ago after he'd tried to force her into a marriage to merge their company with a rival's. She'd chosen her freedom, her dignity, and he'd disowned her for it. She'd never told anyone in Willow Creek, not Caleb, not Mai. The secret had been buried until now. "Dad," she said, her voice shaking but firm, "you don't get to do this. Not here, not now." Roland stepped closer, ignoring the murmurs. "You're a Williams. You don't belong in this dirt-patch town. Come back to Atlanta where you're needed." Caleb moved forward, his voice low and fierce. "She belongs where she chooses, and she's chosen us. You don't know her, not like we do." Roland's gaze flicked to Caleb, dismissive. "And you are?" "Someone who sees her," Caleb said, stepping between Jada and her father. "She's not your asset. She's Jada. Our Jada." Sophie, clutching Caleb's hand, piped up, her voice small but clear. "She's my fairy godmother, and she's gonna be my mommy." The crowd gasped, then cheered, the sound swelling like a gospel chorus. Jada's eyes filled with tears, her heart breaking and mending at once. She knelt, pulling Sophie into a hug. "I love you, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice thick. Roland's face tightened, but he said nothing. He turned and walked away, his suit stark against the colorful crowd, disappearing into the sea of faces. Jada stood, her legs shaky, and Caleb's hand found hers, grounding her. The crowd parted as he led her to the podium, his eyes never leaving hers. "Jada," he said loud enough for all to hear, "you've given this town everything, but you've given me and Sophie more a home, a family." He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small box. The crowd hushed, anticipation electric. He didn't kneel, just held her hands, his voice steady. This ring's simple, made from a stone. Sophie found the night we met you. She said, it was like you, quiet, bright, special. I had it set in silver because it's not about the cost. It's about what it means. His voice faltered just slightly. Will you marry me? Jada's breath caught tears spilling down her cheeks. Yes, she said, nodding. Yes, Caleb. The crowd roared, hats flying, gospel singers bursting into song. Sophie squealed, throwing her arms around them both. I knew it, she shouted, her ribbons bouncing. I told Daddy you'd be our mommy. Darius fumbling as MC dropped the microphone, the feedback screeching. Oops, he laughed, scrambling to pick it up. Guess I'm too excited for y'all. Laughter rippled through the crowd, easing the tension. Mai handed out banbao, her eyes misty while neighbors clapped Caleb on the back. Jada slipped the ring on its pale stone, catching the light, and kissed Caleb soft and sure, the world fading around them. They pulled apart, grinning, and joined Sophie to cut the ribbon on the first home. The white fabric fluttered to the ground, and together they stepped across the threshold into a house that wasn't just wood and nails, but love, forgiveness, and second chances. As the celebration wound down, Jada stood with Caleb and Sophie, watching kids play on the swings, gospel music drifting on the breeze. The ghost of her father's words lingered, but it was faint, drowned out by the life she'd chosen. She wasn't Jada Williams, CEO, or Jada Harris, fugitive. She was just Jada loved, seen home. This story of Jada, Caleb, and Sophie shows us that storms, literal and not, don't come to break us. They clear the path to something better. Love, family, home. Did Jada's courage or Sophie's sweet words touch your heart? Share your favorite moment in the comments and hit subscribe for true stories to join us for more tales of hope and heart. Thank you for being here. Let's keep spreading love and light.